right. So, find my introductions. Wait for me for a second. Okay. Greetings. My name is Eric Chen, and as chair of APA Division 49's Diversity Committee, I would like to welcome you all to the sixth and final diversity presentation. For those of you who just joined us for those of you who just joined us for the first time, and this meeting is being recorded. And please note, just a second. And the recording and the presentation slides later will be made available on our division's YouTube channel, where you could find our previous diversity presentation recording as well. In a few minutes, I'm going to send you the link to our division's diversity resources chat box. After you click the link, you could find more detailed information about all of the previous diversity presentations, as well as our Division 49's YouTube channel. Now I would like to welcome you all. Now I would like to say a few words to introduce our presenters. Dr. Martin Kivlighan is a faculty member at the University of Iowa, where he teaches group psychotherapy and leadership psychotherapy process and outcomes. His research interests are in psychotherapy process and outcome, group psychotherapy, multicultural orientation, and psychotherapy training. Dr. Kivlighan is the co-director of the Psychology Training Clinic, a community-based training clinic that provides free and accessible mental health services to underserved and underinsured rural residents. Within APA, he is currently serving as Division 49's secretary. Dr. Karen Tao is a faculty member at the University of Utah and the director of the clinical mental health counseling program. Her clinical teaching and research interests focus on reducing inequities in the access to an equality of mental health services and educational opportunities for marginalized communities. Earlier this year, Dr. Tao collaborated with PBS Utah to develop a digital media series called Let's Talk to focus on how parents address topics about race, racism, and identity with their own children. Without further ado, let's welcome Martin and Karen. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. We're really excited to be here. We have an hour together, so we can go ahead and just kind of jump in, but we're so excited to see how many people have showed up, and we're excited for this 60 minutes. So Karen and I today are going to talk about how to address problematic systems and group processes in therapy groups from a multicultural orientation framework. And y'all can see my full slides, not the presenter view. Is that correct? Okay, cool. Okay, so what are we hoping to cover in the next 60 minutes? Hopefully we're not being too ambitious. I think we can do this. First, we're going to start off, and Karen will start off by giving a really nice overview of the multicultural orientation framework. What is this? What does it consist of? And then we'll talk a little bit about our team's work in applying the MCO framework to group practice. Talk a little bit about some of the research we've done, what we've found, and then what are some of the implications for practice. And then we were really hoping to make this as experiential as possible. So we'll see how this goes with Zoom. You know, this may be a rounding success or a big flop, but we're really hoping to do some skill practice. So we have a case vignette. We can go into some smaller breakout rooms, reflect on what's coming up for us, and really try to apply an MCO framework. And then come back to a larger group, discuss some of those, our experiences practicing and reflecting on applying an MCO framework to the clinical case vignette. And also we want to allow ample time for reflections, reactions, questions. We're really excited to really get to have a conversation about all of this as well. All right. So before we do that, we wanted to try to get a sense of who is here. And this feels really important, especially given our plan to practice with one another in the second half of this presentation, and in an effort to just try to build a sense of being all together in this space. So we have 3 polling questions that, thanks, Eric. Eric just launched the first one. They're all anonymous, so please complete the poll as you feel comfortable, just to get a sense of who's here. Give everyone a couple seconds. All right, so just in the honor of time, I'll go ahead and end this poll. And we can share this results with everyone. Hopefully everyone can see the results from the polling. So looks like a nice spread. Welcome to the students that are here, faculty members, practitioners. Excited to have diverse representation and perspectives. Oh, sorry. That's my mom. I'll call her back after the presentation. Great. So welcome everyone. And Eric, can you launch the second poll? And so the second question, how familiar are you with the multicultural orientation framework? All right, a couple more seconds here. Wonderful. Again, a good spread. Love the individual who is very familiar with the model. Some who are somewhat, a good amount who are not familiar at all. So hopefully this will be informative for those who do have experience with the MCO model. Would love to hear kind of some of your experiences trying to apply it to your practice. So welcome everyone. And then the final polling question. How comfortable are you bringing up race with your clients? Couple more seconds. All right, and sharing results here.
Cool.
This is great. And everyone can see these results, I'm hoping. Okay. So it looks like the majority of us here, are somewhat to very comfortable talking about race. So again, this will be really great to have all these perspectives within the practice and the discussion part of this presentation. Okay, well, thank you all. It's nice to know who's in the room, and hopefully we'll get to know you all better throughout this hour. All right, so now I'll turn it over to Karen to provide a background and information about the MCO framework.
Good afternoon, good morning, whatever time zone folks are in. I'd like for us to start with a reflection and something we can think about as we continue with this presentation. So I'd like you to think about a time when you learned something new about a friend you thought you knew very well and were surprised by what you learned. And as you think about this new learning, how did it feel to learn about this new piece of information? How did it influence your subsequent interactions or perhaps your relationship overall? And what did you learn about yourself? In the spirit of multicultural orientation, I'd like you to hold this interaction in your mind as we kind of move forward today. Next slide, please. So this happened. Here are some stats from exit polls taken during the US presidential election on November 3rd. It was like far away now in some way, and yet so just recent. So this is a visual representation of our country's deep divide. It's really hard to pinpoint, as I've been thinking about kind of where the friction of our political selves intensified into what I have considered an earthquake of unimagined magnitude. And yet here we are, a country divided. And I've been reflecting a lot about our country's collective cultural rupture. Many of you are familiar with this concept. And what it might take to begin a collective cultural repair. And as much as I'd love to move into a solution-focused mode, I found it really helpful to sit with the discomfort, because what I've learned from experiences as a psychologist, as a mother, as a daughter, as a human being, is that when we are in the midst of a social crisis, the mechanisms through which we filter our information and figure out how to act are our worldviews, our biases. And when we respond so quickly through these mechanisms, we kind of miss fully recognizing that people are not monolithic, and that racial does not define political identity does not define religious identity, and so on and so forth. So what does this mean in a group psychotherapy context? And I know many of us would likely agree that psychotherapy is political. And if we believe this, then we would be likely to agree that every interaction and inaction that we in therapists engage in or don't engage in, especially in a group psychotherapy context, is recapitulating larger social dynamics. So something to think about. And the quote on this slide is by Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, who really beautifully explains sort of how we are in a movement and a moment of evolving. And some of us are evolving sort of not in a sort of loaded, judgy way, but some of us are evolving our values and our ideologies quicker than others. And so how that sometimes can feel like friction as well. So this is a concept Martin and I and several others have been thinking about. So we have the multicultural orientation framework, and thinking about sort of what's our aim, what are we striving for as we practice multicultural orientation sort of skills and behaviors and consciousness. And so this idea of cultural fortitude comes to the foreground, and which I've defined as mental, emotional, and interpersonal strength in the face of cultural discomfort. And this pain sparks courage to move toward cultural repair and healing. So this collective cultural repair, this collective healing. And I think this is especially relevant today as we figure out a way toward connecting across differences within our therapeutic spaces and where we can help clients develop cultural fortitude. So let's move forward with what multicultural orientation is, and really juxtaposing this with the concept of multicultural competence, which many of you are very familiar with, the tripartite model specifically, that I really sort of within the field of psychology grew up learning and embodying, I hope. So this MCC model centers these three ideas of knowledge, skills, and awareness to be able to work with clients who are culturally diverse and similar to ourselves, being able to develop skills that are culturally salient and respectful of our clients, and also being really aware of our biases or assumptions or stereotypes that we might hold about specific groups. And so MCO, multicultural orientation, is really rooted in Dr. Su et al.'s model, and it's offering yet another layer to multicultural counseling by centering a therapist's way of being, how we are in the room. Next slide. So the real Google Earth perspective of what multicultural orientation is how we create a healing context where clients can fully express their cultural selves, how we recognize our behavioral, our emotional, our relational, our somatic responses to every interaction, because all of that is happening in the room, all of that is happening with our groups, and all of our group members are simultaneously experiencing emotions, cognitions, identifying who they relate to, who they don't relate to. The other kind of concept is how do we make the implicit explicit? And this is particularly the wheelhouse of group psychotherapists, in which you're naming the process, making things explicit when perhaps it might be sometimes easy to avoid or not want to see. Considering the frame is that whenever we are in an interaction, there's this invisible frame that surrounds or contextualizes that interaction. And so we really only get a snippet, this one sort of still shot of a larger dynamic. And so multicultural orientation really pushes this idea of what's outside of the frame, what are we not seeing, and developing this muscle of asking, okay, I see this one interaction, but what else? What else is out there? What else is not within my frame? And this one, the last, staying present, really borrows from many sort of theoretical orientations and interventions that value this idea of mindfulness and staying present. Next slide. And here, the framework again. I'll talk briefly about each of the pillars of multicultural orientation. So I'll start with cultural opportunities, and toward the side of each of these pillars are questions that we might ask ourselves that elicit sort of how does cultural opportunity emerge? How does cultural humility emerge, and so forth. So cultural opportunities are the moments within a session when there is an opening to directly attend to a client's cultural identity. And these are things that might be implicitly brought up by clients, sometimes more explicitly. And according to some of, and Martin will talk about this in a bit, according to some of our MCO literature, cultural opportunities emerge a lot. They happen all the time. There are mentions of cultural content that provide an opportunity to explore a salient aspect of the client's identity. And what we also have learned is that clients who are having more conversations related to their cultural identity indicate better treatment outcomes than those who have had fewer conversations. And so these are some questions. What are some aspects of clients' cultural identities that are salient, that are coming up? And how might this be important to explore further? Cultural humility is a pillar, the second pillar, and it is an other-oriented stance marked by openness, curiosity, genuine investment in understanding clients' cultural identity. And the stance that I refer to is about remaining open to learning something new about a client. So when you think about the reflection that we invited you to think about a friend is, what's something new that I can learn? What surprised me that I didn't expect? And then also asking, I wonder why I'm surprised by this, or what more can I learn? So each interaction is a new interaction. And in practice, cultural humility is where a client paves and paces the direction of a conversation about who they are, their identities, their cultural background. And finally, cultural comfort. The way we've kind of operationalized or defined cultural comfort is it's the perceived ease or fluidity in which therapists participate in cultural conversations. So these can be affective or behavioral components, our feelings, as our openness, our non-defensiveness, how calm we are, how relaxed we feel. And so you'll notice what are some of the somatic cues. One of the things I like to sort of think about is when we are in a conversation that is heading towards sort of discussion around our cultural selves, what shows up in our body, our heart racing, do we start to get sweaty? And when we're calm and relaxed, what do we notice about the way our paralinguistics sort of emerge? We talk maybe slower. And when we're uncomfortable, maybe we talk faster. We tend to do more psychoeducation with our clients. And so many of these behavioral responses can be understood through our cultural socialization processes. And some questions that we might think about are, what am I doing? So this is our internal dialogue, our reflexivity. Or what am I not doing? What am I not bringing up? And then asking ourselves, how come? Being curious about that. And so in the box to the top, multicultural orientation really illuminates that when we're in a room with our clients, emotion, cognition, behavior, somatic, and relational cues really guide us and give us lots of data as to what's happening between us and among the group or in individuals. Okay, we're gonna do a deeper dive.
What's that?
Oh, we'll just do a deeper dive next.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Super, super helpful. And yeah, just as Karen said, now I'm gonna kind of transition a little bit into our team's work on applying this framework to group practice, okay? So before I get into the research that we've done and implications for practice, I really think it's important to kind of outline some of our guiding assumptions as we enter or as we conduct research, as we practice from this orientation. So there's 6 that really guide our work in this regard. And the first is that we're all cultural beings that hold multiple cultural identities and experiences. And as such, therapy groups are multicultural groups consisting of multiple individuals with various identities and cultural lived experiences. So as such, we really enter this work with this assumption that all group work is multicultural work, right? This is not just relegated to identity-based groups or groups that are set out as a goal to explore cultural experiences, but all group work is multicultural group work. Second, and informed by the social microcosm theory, we argue that groups reflect the larger sociocultural and political climate, right? So this means that systems of power, systems of oppression are often present within therapy groups, similar to outside therapy groups. And members often differ, or we know that members differ in their positionality and their relation to these systems of power and systems of oppression, right? So although it would be ideal for therapy groups to kind of overcome these systems, we argue that that's just not a reality and that these systems are present. And so we need to be mindful of that. Third and fourth, cultural identities and experiences are of value and greatly impact processes and outcomes of group treatments. I mean, many of the attendees today have written extensively on this, have really contributed greatly to our understanding of how culture impacts group processes and outcomes, right? Fifth, groups, can either perpetuate negative and harmful racial cultural events, or they can facilitate racial and cultural repair and healing, okay? And this guiding assumption really informs the application of the MCO model to group practice and leads to the last assumption, that multicultural group work is largely making the implicit explicit, as Karen pointed out. And, and this has been identified by various terms, right? Jodwing Su talks about making the invisible visible. So it's a very similar concept, but it's meaning that we need to acknowledge and name cultural processes and dynamics as they emerge in therapy groups in order to facilitate racial and cultural healing. And that we believe the MCO framework may represent, one tool to just help us in this work. Okay, so based on these assumptions, our team sought out to initially develop and test the MCOG inventory, which is a measure to help us try to examine, operationalize cultural processes as they emerge within therapy groups. And what I really want to make sure that is clear here is, based on these assumptions, our work is really focused on studying multicultural orientation of the group as a whole. Okay, so a lot of the individual psychotherapy literature has focused on the MCO of a therapist. And you could do so within group therapy research, look at group leaders, but we've really tried to look at this kind of group as a whole phenomenon and our group's multicultural orientations, positive or perceived to be lacking. So therefore, this means that, our body of research really tries to examine the group's collective way of being during conversations of culture. So what does the research tell us? I'll go through a couple studies that our team has collaborated on. So in the first study that applied MCO to therapy groups, our results indicated that members of groups that were perceived high in cultural humility, cultural comfort, and cultural opportunities reported greater improvement and stronger group cohesion. However, in another study, we also found that these cultural processes differentially impact group members. So in a follow-up study that was informed by literature on white fragility and racial socialization, we found that racial ethnic minority status significantly moderated this relationship between cultural comfort and clients' cultural concealment and perceived improvement. So, such that members of color reported greater cultural concealment and less improvement in therapy groups they perceived to be low in cultural comfort. And these relationships were not significant for white members. So, I really think this finding is pretty interesting because it suggests, potentially suggests that it's not enough to just engage these conversations, right? Which is incredibly important, but rather it's these behavioral and affective ways in which we do so that may communicate important things to group members who hold marginalized identities. So it's really bringing in these pieces that Karen touched on so nicely around our behavioral, our somatic, our affective ways in which we are engaging these cultural processes. We also have evidence that the group's MCO may serve to buffer or further exacerbate the detrimental effects of racial microaggressions. So in a recent study, we found that the group's cultural comfort moderated the relationship between racial microaggressions and group cohesion. And specifically, microaggressions were negatively related to members' ratings of cohesion in groups with low cultural comfort. But in groups with high cultural comfort, that impact of racial microaggressions was less on perceived cohesion. So something about the group's ability to kind of sit in these moments, and to address these ruptures with a sense of ease, of fluidity, of calmness, in this rupture was important, at least in regards to group cohesion. And then lastly, in a study, we're starting to try to look at the leader's multicultural orientation as well. And we found that group members reported the greatest benefit when they perceived both the group as a whole's cultural humility high and the leader's cultural humility high. And interestingly, we also found that there was kind of a compensatory effect for cultural opportunities. So when members perceived the group to be low in cultural opportunities, leaders were able to compensate for that. And so when the group was low and leaders were high in cultural opportunities, members reported greatest improvement, and vice versa. If leaders weren't able to take cultural opportunities, but the group itself were kind of able to step in and do that work, members also equally benefited. So, I'll be the first to admit we're really scraping the tip of the iceberg here. There's so much more to do. Y'all know as group practitioners that these are complex processes that are emerging here, but we're trying to get a sense of how is the group's ability to engage, cultural humility, comfort, take opportunities related to some of these larger dynamics as they emerge. Okay, so enough with the boring research. What might all this mean, right? So how can we maybe apply some of these findings to our practice? There's three main things that I'll really point to here. So it points to the fact that group leaders can foster a positive group MCO. And we suggest that group preparation is an important place to start. And it should start as early as group preparation. So we start by initiating conversations of culture, assessing salient cultural identities and experiences. And equally important, within these group preparation sessions, having conversations with group members about their comfort and their unease of discussing issues of diversity and culture, and then also providing maybe some psychoeducation on the importance of doing so, that we know that this is a really important process for healing, right? Especially given larger systems of power and oppression at play. And then also in early stages of the group, leaders can assume a model setting participant role in order to model this way of being, with the hopes that the group will adopt these positive norms of cultural humility, cultural comfort, cultural opportunities, right? I mean, we have that role and responsibility that if we take this on, that hopefully those positive norms around MCO will continue, through the life of the group. Making the implicit explicit, making the invisible visible. So group therapists can seek cultural opportunities to illuminate cultural dynamics as they emerge. We can be curious of the ways that members' cultural experience and how they be curious of members' cultural experiences and how they relate to their goals, their participation, their experience in group. This is ever present. It's not only present within cultural ruptures, but what are the cultural strengths and positive aspects that are informing participation, goals, and outcomes. And then linking in-group and out-group cultural processes to name ways our socialization impacts ways of being and relating with one another within the group, okay? And then finally, addressing microaggressions or cultural ruptures as they occur. I do a little nod to Dr. Platt, who, provided an incredibly informative and wonderful presentation on addressing microaggressions in group therapy. So if you haven't seen that, please do. I thought it was incredibly informative. What I would add to some of these conversations, or what we would add from an MCO perspective, is this importance of not just taking these cultural opportunities, but also reflecting on how are we engaging these? What is our level of comfort? And how are those processes of humility and comfort either bolstering our opportunities or maybe lessening the positive impact of addressing some of these cultural ruptures as they emerge? All right. So we have arrived to the time where let's do this work. So Oh, welcome, children. So let's practice. So we're hoping that we're going to present a clinical vignette, and then we'll create breakout rooms for y'all in a smaller group to reflect on the prompts that we provide after the case vignette, and then come back and do a little bit of sharing within the larger group as people feel comfortable, which then will transition into a larger discussion, which we're really excited to hear people's reactions, reflections, further thoughts. So I'll go ahead, and Karen, please pop in, you know, if I'm leading us in the wrong direction here. But I'll go ahead and put the case vignette up and give y'all ample time to go ahead and read through it. So read through the case vignette, and then we'll make some breakout rooms, and we'll put up the discussion prompts within the chat as well.
Maybe we want to read it out loud for folks who might be joining on phone and can't see.
Sure, that is a wonderful idea. Karen, would you like to?
Why, sure, I'd love to. Okay, so case vignette. You are a co-therapist of an interpersonal process group. It's a closed group within a university counseling center, which is comprised of 8 undergraduate students who are referred by their individual therapists. Your co-therapist is an Asian American cisgender heterosexual female. 2 group members identify as people of color, 1 Black cisgender heterosexual woman, and 1 Latina cisgender heterosexual woman. 1 white student who identifies as gender non-binary, 1 transgender heterosexual woman, 2 white cisgender heterosexual women, and 2 white cisgender heterosexual men. I know, so many identifiers to hold in our heads. The focus of conversation during this 4th group session has been on where and with whom group members feel the most seen or understood by others, and why. At one point of the conversation, a white gender non-binary group member makes a comment to a Black cisgender heterosexual woman. I feel like you'd be someone who could really understand me because we both have marginalized identities. To this comment, the Black woman replies, I don't see that. You're white. Our lived experiences are completely different. At this point, a white male member chimes in, I don't even get why we can't just see each other as human beings rather than racial or gender categories. It just creates more division. This was followed by a transgender group member's statement, easy for you to say when you have all the privileges. The group goes silent, with most people looking down at their feet.
Okay, so I'll advance us to some of the discussion prompts to think through and to guide our small group conversation. So some things to consider. What thoughts, feelings, somatic reactions arose when reading this vignette? What were some of the parts of the vignette you centered on, and how come? What resonated with you, and who resonated with you? And kind of expanding beyond the group therapy room, where has a dynamic like this happened before? What role did you play in this past interaction? What would you say first, and to whom, and why? And how would you include the whole group in this interaction? So I'm gonna stop sharing screen for a quick second so I can pop these in the chat as well as try to.
They're there. I just put them in the chat.
Oh, you're wonderful. Thank you. Eric, I don't see the ability to do the breakout rooms on my end. Can you do that on your end real quickly?
Yes, let me see if I could do that. Yes, how many breakout rooms do you want?
We were gonna just do how many participants are here? How
30
about we do
yeah.
10 breakout rooms? So it's like small groups of 2 to 3.
Okay, 10, right? Okay, 10 rooms. Okay, now I am creating now. Okay,
Perfect.
how long? How long
All
is
right,
it?
so we'll come back in 5 minutes. Oh, bye everyone. Okay.
I'll let everyone know.
Okay, thanks.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So maybe, I know maybe it would be best to mute ourselves and then unmute to talk. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback.
You're getting a terrible echo.
All right, so maybe we open this up for what came up in conversations, points that you want to share with a larger group that were really salient.
Well, I'll start. Lee Casson over here in the corner. I was, the way I work, I tend to keep the focus in the room, what's happening between us right now. And I was wondering if that maybe kept the focus away from these kinds of discussions.
Can you say a little bit more there, Lee?
Well, I'm not so interested in this stuff outside the room. I try to always keep bringing it back to what's happening right here, right now. And again, I'm just not sure that focus is going to lead to these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important distinction too, because there's broadly two ways we can go, right? We can focus on the in-group experiences and really hone in on those processes as they're emerging, or we can kind of take that out to the larger, systems and say, what's being recapitulated here? I'm curious for, others. Did you largely focus on these processes as they were unfolding within the members, or did you kind of expand it out to outside the group?
No, not so much. I tend to stay in the room.
Great.
Well, Martin knows this because he was in our group, but we stayed in the room. We started with what's going on between them and sort of considering that. And then I think that conversation, my assumption is that would naturally lead to, if you say, what just happened here, and we get into it, it would naturally lead to, and where have you experienced that before? And how is that showing up in group? So that was what we did.
I think one thing too that I really appreciated in our small group discussion is, Dr. Platt really was talking through kind of this pull between two of the group members that were initially engaged in trying to connect, the non-binary white group member really trying to make a connection, but there's a miss there. And then for me, what was really salient and complicated it was then, this other white member comes in and espouses this colorblind ideology. And for me, I was like, oh, now you've just made it even more complicated. Like, we could have maybe handled this, but now this on top of this, and then we all experience this. I see in many people's heads nodding, that it's also multi-layered and complex, as group members respond to what's happening as it's unfolding.
See a hand, Ria, did you want to share?
Sure. Am I the one? I'm not sure why somebody said.
I thought I saw your hand go like this, and I said, okay.
Oh, well, there you go. I was thinking, so that's good. This makes me think of a number of things. It's interesting when that other person came in with this sort of color blindness. At first, I felt exasperated, but then I was like, okay, good. So this really gives us a chance to say, well, this is why it's important. Because I mean, that kind of view has also been used to negate individuals really asserting their identity. And so after I thought about it, I was thinking, well, this is a good thing that this is in here too. We can't ignore this. This is something we have to talk about. And as a Black African American, I realized that I don't do a good job of addressing race and culture with my white clients. It's like talked around, it's like assumed, and it's never really addressed head on, where with almost every single time with people of color, across different races and cultures, it's just a part of the natural conversation. And I've got to do a better job of really acknowledging and giving room for that with my white clients as well.
So
Oh,
glad you
Rhea,
brought
thank
it
you for
up.
saying that. You know, I have to come to grips with I'm being an old fat white man, and I train people in group therapy. You know, I'm an internship guy. This year, as APEC graduates, I'll have done 80 in 20 years. So, you know, I have a huge issue with all these things because I want it to be good for everybody. So one of the things that I responded to was the structural about you can't get into group in my place unless you have had an intake and you have a primary, because if you need to deal with the group, you got a primary to deal with it with. But also everyone gets a group screen, which involves preparation, and that involves the discussion about what kind of an environment we're in and how we talk about each other and cultural sensitivities. So I think to some extent, when these things do boil up, we can go back to our rules to some extent. And I think that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, a couple of things that come up. Taria, what you were saying of, you were saying, I need to do a better job. We all need to do a better job of bringing particularly race and racism, and within white dyads or white, predominantly white groups, oftentimes the idea of bringing in these topics don't kind of come up. And how do we make it come up in those contexts where there might not be a visible cue to be like, oh, I should be maybe talking about race or racism, but then when it's a white sort of dyad or predominantly white group, then we turn that sort of muscle off. And how do we turn that, how do we activate that muscle, especially in those contexts, because those conversations should be happening in all contexts if we're to sort of address the larger sort of social issue. And then the other piece around, Dr. Gross, you had mentioned, sort of what does the intake look like prior? What are the conversations that happen before we enter into the group context? I think you're right on point in terms of those are really important sort of socialization types of conversations, and recognizing, and then you all know this, that I've often thought about groups as, for some white clients, as a little bit like prolonged exposure when we bring up race and racism, because there's been a phobia or there's been a resistance, avoidance, whether conscious or not. And so then when they enter into these groups, there is this sort of scaffolding that needs to happen, because there are some clients who have never talked about this. And so they stumble over a lot of their words, and it is sort of sitting in the sort of exposure therapy. And that, how do we sort of hold that while we also have clients of color, BIPOC clients who've been doing this their whole lives. And so
Yes.
I think as group therapists, we're especially tasked with this sort of, how do we, make sure that we're holding all of those spaces.
I'm a little afraid my comment was, I really wanted to say that I appreciated so much what Rhea said, because it came from like, this is my experience. And that's, for me, it's like I'm trying to make sense of my experience in the context of others. And I think going to the structural didn't give enough respect to what you said, because it really struck me emotionally. So I want to just again return. I appreciate you making that comment.
Well, I appreciated your part about the structure. It made me wonder, what is the structure, and what would it be addressing in terms of what the members brought up? In terms of, I mean, is the structure what's okay to talk about, what's not okay, or is it about how we talk about it or whatever? And I have to just throw this out. It's kind of interesting to me. I'm aware, and now I don't know whether to call you Karen or Dr. Tao, but I'm aware that you called me Ria and you called him Dr. Gross.
Mhm.
And I'm like, what's that?
Uh-huh.
That is right. That's right.
Thank you for that.
Yep. Thank you for that.
That, you know, it's ever present, right? And this is why,
Uh-huh.
as it's been noted over and over again, this is a lifelong process, you know. And one thing I want to kind of bring into this too with the MCO, I think sometimes, you know, there's a perception that like, oh, MCO, all we have to do is just go into the room and just be curious, you know, and then our clients will educate us. And, you know, what Karen brings in the very beginning is this is complementary to what Sue has done, the immense amount of work there, and that it doesn't stand on its own. We still have to do the heavy lifting. We still have to do the knowledge, awareness, and skills. And this complements that. Once we've done that heavy lifting and continue to do it our entire lives, what are the processes that, you know, we need to be mindful of in the therapeutic space too? So kind of holding both of those together, right? And yeah, it's a lifelong process. Oh my gosh, I know I wish we had another hour. Colleen, I saw that you unmuted. Was there something that you wanted to say?
Well, I just wanted to say that I live in Vancouver, Canada, and we recently had an election, and our re-elected premier actually said in response to a question, I don't see color. And I think that sometimes I've done some workshops with Pat Ogden and over the fall, and her talking about, you know, the context of these things. And so for some of us that are older, that was kind of what people thought in the 60s, but it's not what we think in the knots, right? In the 20 teens. And so it really is a matter of educating ourselves about what's relevant now, not what's relevant when we were 20 years old.
Indeed, on that note of educating ourselves, I really want to thank Martin and Karen for allowing us to continue our being culturally curious, and also being comfortable in addressing all these issues in order for us to expand our own, to seek out opportunities, to expand our own competencies in the future. I also want to acknowledge that in the audience are our previous presenters, Nathaniel and also Aziza, and then Joe Miles was here earlier as well. They did a fantastic job. So I hope that you later could take advantage of those recordings that are available through our YouTube channel, and perhaps share with your own, maybe your own trainees, your colleagues in the future, so we could all work together to make a difference. And I hope that 2021 will definitely bring more opportunities for us to make a difference in our society, so that it could be more socially just and inclusive. And I'm really hopeful. Look at you all, look at all those faces. I cannot imagine what 2021 will bring to us all. So on that note, I thank you all for joining us today, and stay safe and healthy and happy holidays. And thank you, Karen, Martin, again. Bye.
Bye, thank everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Great job. Thank